So I'm joined by Zsolt Olah, who is a senior HR Data Analyst for Intel, correct?
Yes, that's
Yes.
correct.
And so I'm excited to have you here in person with me to talk because I do know that you just recently ran a workshop here at DevLearn, and you brought up two things that mean a lot to me that are near and dear to my heart. One is data, and the other, and that you don't often hear in the same breath as data, is engagement. I spent a lot of time talking about how do we get people really, sort of engaged and bought into the things that we're doing. And I often find that, well, to some degree, data really helps you do that. So I'm fascinated to hear sort of about that. So give me sort of an overview of, what you are trying to bring to these pretty in-depth workshop to folks to understand about data.
So first of all, when you think about data, people think about their nightmares from high school, stats, formulas, and all that, spreadsheets. And we start this program understanding that this is not what it's about. We're not going to have formulas. We're not going to scare people away. And we use actually data or think about data as a language. And if you think about language and compare that to like Duolingo sort of things, that's the approach of, okay, if I have data, which now we have everywhere, then it's not enough. We need to actually use the data. We need to speak the language because ultimately it's not like we have to be right. Actually, I have to make you do something. I want actions and reactions from that. I need insights, but I also have to be a little bit psychiatrist of what do you need to know and how and sort of thing. So it's a language, like you use it as a language. And I always thought that people generally want data, but it's not really true apparently. People love engagement, they love shiny things, they love AI. But I think it starts with understanding the first principle of why we're measuring and what we're measuring. And then you can, take the data and work with it. So that was my sort of starting point. I was a big disappointment at the beginning that I did not find a good data literacy course out there. There was a lot of talking about it, but not actually hands-on doing it.
No, I think you're spot on. The data comes up all the time, and I think you're right that the people's first reaction, unless they come from a data background, is typically like, okay, well, because there is just so much. Whenever we start to talk about data to HR people, they feel like they're just overwhelmed by the amount of data that's available to them, and it's really hard to figure out where to go. But I love your idea of talking about it like a language, because very often when I'm talking to learning leaders, so one of the biggest things we can do is learn how to speak the same language as the business, right? So what happens is the business, each part of it, just by its own nature, everyone develops their own language, how we talk about things. Within that L&D silo, we talk about things in a certain way. So the ability to cross over to another language of the business is very important. I think data can be sort of that universal language.
And not just across. So it actually starts with the team. If the team doesn't speak the same language,
True.
And one works with one way with the stakeholders, another way, speaking about different things when it's the same, then you have a problem. So that's the starting point for the team to understand that we need to speak the same language, and then we can reach out to others and use the same language.
So what are some of the principles behind that? Like, how do you get people to cross that threshold where they're terrified of data to it becoming sort of a second language for them?
So I did some research. Again, I looked everywhere online, big companies, and they all were starting point of data classifications, and this is what you need to know. It's almost like learning a language by memorizing every grammar rule. It's great, it works, but that's not, for example, Duolingo did.
Right.
What do people want to do with speaking? They want to go to a country and say a sentence so they don't get sold somewhere or completely misunderstood. That's the starting point. So what does the language do for L&D? They talk about pilots and they talk about learning. So let's not start with every single spreadsheet and type of data and all that, but let's show them a result in a fictitious land, add a little bit of whimsical characters in them, a little bit of AI sort of things by now, and tell them a story. So right now they're in the story of they're hired to make a decision about a pilot. It's a sales pilot. So it sounds like and feels like a duck. It's a duck, but it's a made-up duck. So I created the data set under it, so there's a story behind. And that's the whole point of for them to understand what happened in this pilot. And at the end of the workshop, they need to make a decision. Is it ready to scale? Is it should be abandoned or somewhere in between?
I get it. Yeah, I mean, I, one of the things that I keep talking about and having questions around with the people that I talk to, everyone's very much obviously focused on AI right now, and you know, you can't really talk about AI in any way and in depth without getting to sort of data. And I fear that there may be among people who are not, who maybe don't have a data background, who want to do better at this kind of thing. They look at something like the promise of AI and think, oh, I can just skip the data stage, right? I can skip the part about understanding data because AI will sort it all out for me. I tend to think, in my limited experience, that um, if you don't at least have some sort of data literacy, um, AI could be disaster because you don't know what's making the the technology intelligent. I mean, am I close? Is that, do you have a philosophy on that?
Yeah, I mean, it's like if you do something now, it's not effective, but now you use AI to do it, you're just gonna be very effective doing the not effective thing. So you can
Yep.
create more content faster, but you're still not moving the needle. Another thing is, I think with AI, we also have this problem that actually AI wants to please us. So if you don't have the right thinking, you think you're right, and that's how you approach AI. They're gonna like, yeah, you're absolutely right. This is great.
Yeah.
Do it.
And you'll find all the things that
And then
support that.
I always suggest people when they use AI for all kinds of support and all that. But one thing that I always say when you use data is ask AI to be the devil's advocate and say, hey, what am I not thinking? What am I not thinking about? What's poke me holes into this theory that I have? So basically, it's a safe space instead of going out and finding people to do that to you.
Yeah. No, and what's interesting about it to me is that this idea of data literacy is very timely because I've been, as a research analyst, I've done a lot of studies that look at the ways in which L&D leaders and teams look at things like this. And when it comes to measurement, when they're like, how do we measure how well learning is doing? One of the biggest challenges that always pops up all the time is that, well, we don't really have the data analysis skills available to us. So the L&D team doesn't, most don't have a data scientist. Most don't have someone who's even a data analyst. And so maybe they're lucky that they work, they have an organization where there is that skill somewhere in the organization and they can sort of share that. But I've found that, as the tools become a little bit easier for a layperson to use, do analysis, there still needs to be this level of data literacy to make that work. I mean, are you seeing more of an acceptance? I mean, you do this workshop. Are you seeing that people think, even without a data background, this is the tool that I need to have?
I think that's one of our sort of lessons learned, and this is one of the mistakes I made also early on. So I have a computer science engineering background. So I can code and all that. I love that, but I was a people person, so I did the learning design side of things for 20 years. And I started with this engagement angle of, oh, I have so much technology behind me. I can take any of these authoring tools, push them to the limit, and make like games and interactive things. And it was all great. Everybody loved that.
Mm-hmm.
Until one day I went to a call center. I saw this set of 10 people who's taking calls, and I built some interactive things for them before. And I spent a day with them, and I realized like these people don't need games at this point. They need better monitors. They need a better system and some real-time tools that they use to look up things. And so I went back, and this was sort of my starting point of always I need to understand what's the end, how you measure the actual result, and not relying on some subject matter expert or some stakeholders saying that we need training.
Right, of course.
Yeah.
And in this L&D world, can't help but be inundated with, you need to do more gamification, more blended learning, more micro learning. And all these things are true, but not just for their own sake. And I think you make a good point. Is like the greatest sort of modern approach to learning. If it doesn't meet the needs of that audience, then it's meaningless, right? It turns out, listen, we really just needed a tool that helps us do this job while we're doing it. Those other things may work for other outcomes. I love that you've sort of married this idea of being able to be data driven, but also that relationship with people kind of piece.
Yeah, because you want to make a change, and change happens through people and not through data itself. In fact, if you keep the people out and just make it data driven, then you get very interesting results because they really don't care about what's happening around the world, but you set a rule. But I'm going to give you an example because you mentioned engagement, and it's one of those topics where everybody wants engagement on their platform, but it means different things for everyone. So if you go to like LinkedIn, they want you to be in the platform or Facebook
Right.
as long as they can. That's their goal. That's the result that they want. If you go to a learning platform, they don't want you to keep you there forever.
Right.
They want you to learn something and then go back. And then understanding how you define engagement starts the whole process. And you go backwards, not whatever I think engagement is, we should do more of that.
Right.
That's one. The second is, and this is where data sort of analytics comes in, is I asked in my workshop about how much data they're collecting today about engagement, and what they realized that they're collecting physical engagement. So clicks, drags, log, whatever you do. And I said, what about the other two dimensions of engagement? One is, how do you know they're actually enjoying what they're doing? Because I can force you to click all day long, and yet learn nothing, or really boring. Or I can make a excellent animation, absolutely funny script, completely entertaining, and yet zero knowledge out of that. So all these three together needs to be measured, because otherwise you're over indexing one of them and you create something that's not working again.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, and I always think about engagement like one of the biggest issues, and I always come back to the what's in it for me part of anything that you're doing. It's a question that we all ask ourselves, either consciously or subconsciously, encounter something that we're going to do. And if we're not able to tell people this is why this particular learning experience matters, then they're not even engaged before they even click on something or open it up, or you say you make this great animation. Doesn't matter how great the animation is, because if they don't know why it's important, then you're fighting uphill for that engagement before they've even opened it, right? You're just starting from zero. Whereas they're like, oh, okay, I know why I should follow this path and why I should look at this particular piece.
And that's one of the reasons why behind this workshop, it took a long time to create the balance between a storytelling sort of narrative-driven approach, but also don't distract them from what's happening. But I did a lot of research on motivational theories, because ultimately what we want is behavior or action. And so the first question is going to be, and that's what I always suggest learning designers also ask them, what do you want them to do? Okay, now we know I want you to sell something, or closing objections, addressing objections, or whatever your actual task is. But then the next thing is what makes it difficult to do today on the job, not in theory, but on the job. And if you know that, then you can start building this sort of mechanics of, okay, what people will drive, what are the components that drive people to do that? What are the things that hold them back? What are the barriers? So it's a lot of like underlying work of what makes people do what they do. I guess some people make a lot of money on that. I don't make a lot of money on that, but it helps us to understand what to measure them. And then you get, for example, we're shifting from asking you about how you like the course or what you did and what was the result and all that. It's like very retrospective thing of your experience. Like if you go to a dentist, imagine you go to a dentist, you walk out, and they don't ask you like, okay, so do you think the dentist used the right tools? I was like, I don't know. They should, I should be the expert, but did it hurt? That's okay. That's fine. Or when you come back next, will you come back next? That's a good question. So this is what we're doing also with data, is thinking about not what happened, but how we use what happened to do that, to apply that. And part of it is motivation. Part of it is about, do you see the opportunities to use these things? How many times in the next 2 weeks you're going to be able to use this somewhere? Because if not, we can have all the training in the world. You're going to forget it.
Yeah. Right. Is that a big component of the workshop, this idea of moving away from just what happened, right? The measurement, the data about what happened. And not that we shouldn't be looking at that and tracking that, but by itself, it doesn't tell you much other than sort of the news, right? This is what happened. Is there an element of how do we move from that view to a more forward-looking view as to like, okay, what happened, maybe why it happened, and then how can we make something else happen in the future?
Yeah, so the workshop itself is less about a teaching, because there's a bunch of things you can go through, like the descriptive, all
Yeah.
the way to descriptive to predictive analytics and all that. It's making you change your mind of how you think about data, and part of it is the first sort of chart that they go through, very familiar. You have 4.4 on a 1 to 5 scale, satisfaction, excellent. How did you do that? This is how you calculate that. Like, what does that mean?
Right.
Well, I don't know. So what actions are you doing? What decisions are you making on this random number here? And that's when we started talking about how much of that big picture is this one single number make in your design. If that's the only number you collect, and that's what your decision is, then you make probably a lot of wrong decisions.
I mean, I probably wouldn't be surprised in my experience talking to organizations, the kinds of decisions that get made on that one piece, the overinvestment in a program that people thumbs up.
Like
or
don't get me started on NPS
right.
scores. I had so many conversations around the team dragged me in that they never had this low NPS score. What do we do now? I said, how many people did show up on these scores? 10. Okay, so it doesn't matter because the margin of error is probably all the way down and all the way up.
Right.
It's just noise.
Mm-hmm.
So would you like to have some data that somehow actually tells you why they think that? Oh yeah, you have that. No, but we have the NPS score. I was like, maybe we can ask different questions that the options themselves tell that. So what do you want to know? I want to know, what do they recommend these scores? Fine. Then just ask them and then tell them, do you recommend these scores? No. Do you recommend these scores? Yes, but with big changes or small changes or as is.
Mm.
So now you can have data. You can still have a number out of those, the percentage of the good answers, but you could see the data over time. And if it's shifting from, I want to recommend this as is, all the way to slowly to, I think this needs to be changed, then you can act on it proactively rather than just watching a number going up and down. So that's a simple example. You can start today. You don't need technology. You don't need some kind of big investment.
But I think you make a good point. Is if that's all you have available to you because of the way you've set things up, where the organization is set up, and that's all you're going to use. If it's completion rates, smile sheets, NPS scores, what have you. The challenge I think that I talk to companies about is the things that you're after are being collected somewhere in the organization. There's so much data in the organization, and it is being captured somehow, somewhere. The idea is, and is this something that you help people with? Is how do you find the right data? Because we talk about how people are scared of data. They think there's too much. How do they find the right data and then start to use it?
So I think what happens is that we we have this funky world view of either or. So you start out with, yes, we need, if you use Kirkpatrick, we need 4, and we have to get ROI. If you use the, which we use, LTEM, Timeheimer, we should have to go about the 8 tier about engagement. Oh, this is hard. Data is not available. So let's just not do anything. So it's a scale. And this whole workshop is about, where do you start? Because, if everybody who plays some kind of sport in some level would never do anything because they cannot be in the NBA, then we would just not do anything. So you don't have to be starting point at the top, but you have to start somewhere. And actually what happens is that when you start doing it, then you bring in more people, more stakeholders. So my suggestion yesterday was, as well in the workshop, is, where do you start this? First of all, you start with the bottom of understanding, again, the data. So you're comfortable with speaking about it. But the next thing is, find someone in the organization, someone out of the business, so not in learning circles, but in the business, who's interested in knowing data so they can act on it. So don't start with, bringing it to the organization and everything's going to be changed and it's going to be great and revolution. I've never seen that work.
Right.
Start with one person, one project, very small scope, document it, share it. Because what happens after is, people don't ask you what it did. They ask you, how did you do that? And could that be used for other things? And now you can go and it's like, yes, we did this. This is how the method we used. 80% of it applies, 20% we can customize. So now you're talking. Other than that, it's going to be all just talking and talking and talking about it, but not doing it.
Yep.
So that's my suggestion. Find someone, find a pilot, someone who champions it, and just basically not using anything today from L&D because they don't see the point of looking at satisfaction.
No, that's a great point. I always try to encourage L&D teams, find those partners in the business to help you figure these things out. But I think that advice is even better. Start with one, find the right thing, and then build on that success because that person exists in your organization. It's just connecting and making that relationship.
And the other thing is, I think by you waiting that, you don't have to just sit around and wait for 6 months until someone pops up. So the starting point, the entry point of this, the easiest one, at least I can see today, is everybody's doing some surveys. So that is generally that people have some tools to send out and ask questions. Changing the surveys themselves, again, from shifting from what happened, how it happened, were you satisfied with the structure of the course and all that, when in the first place you're not even thinking about changing the course anyway, then change that into more futuristic. Are they having right motivations, or are they willing to even prioritize this thing for themselves? The opportunities are there. What skills they think they have because we're providing them. And then do they have any sort of goals to do? Because if you don't have a goal, any sort of tiny little thing that you want to do with it, you're not going to do that.
Right.
So start with that. Change the question, see the data that's coming in. And then when you see that, changing the question, speaking the language of data, when you have data, more actionable data than before, then you have your appetite and confidence of, okay, what's next? How can we change, for example, the engagement level? Is there any other way than just watching people doing things, collecting that, and expand that? So there's a lot of things you can do while you're waiting slowly, but you do need allies to do it because otherwise people just come to you last moment. We need training. I need content. Here's the SME.
Yeah, no context. Yep. No, that's fascinating stuff. Zsolt, do you have any way that you want to let people know maybe if they have questions for you, can they reach out to you somehow? Do you want to let people know how to get in touch with you? And I don't know if you do these workshops just DevLearn or other places or annually or anything like that, but I think this idea of sort of demystifying data for L&D people is very, very important.
So it would take a long time if I just did my own, and then at some point everybody would do this. That would take probably 10, 15 years. So there's a shorter version of this workshop if they want to. So 1 hour, anybody can come in, sort of things. I generally do this once at least a year conference. When you have just have a flavor of that, what does it look like when you work in teams around data, making decisions, and you can see that what is good for you or not. That's probably the good entry point.
Yeah.
I don't generally do the big 6-hour workshops more than once a year. It's not really my job. I actually build this for my team when I worked at Amazon. Now with Intel, it's the same concept of let's have the team working together on this. So it's not like a money-making effort from my part. But I do have this online. It's basically a game box with a dashboard and cards and all that.
Oh.
So sometimes companies do just order one of them, and they do it on their own just to test it out, and then they decide whether they want to make their own version of that. Because again, the data is very generic here, but you can make your own version of that and do whatever you want with it.
Oh, that's great. Well, I really appreciate you spending some time with me, and I hope you have a good rest of the show, and thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me, and enjoy the show. By the way, LinkedIn is the best way to connect with me if anyone.
That makes sense. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dave.